welcome to the debate. Today, we're looking at what I would call a pretty terrifying paradox.
Yeah, it really is.
Right?
Yeah.
It's this question of why the exact traits that allow an ambitious leader to reach, the absolute pinnacle of their industry are often the very same triggers that cause them to completely collapse behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the founder who just closed, say, a $50 million Series B. On paper, they have won. They're popping champagne, their status is undeniable, their market share is surging. But physically,
Oh, they were a wreck.
exactly. Their heart is pounding out of their chest, their stomach is in knots, and when they go home, they are just completely emotionally unavailable, deeply isolated, and fundamentally exhausted. They function flawlessly in public while privately experiencing intense fragmentation.
It is the absolute definition of a hollow victory. I mean, we see this epidemic of executives and senior managers who have built this towering skyscraper of success. But when you look closely at the foundation, the concrete is entirely fractured.
Right.
They have achieved everything they set out to achieve, yet they're haunted by this profound, echoing sense of emptiness.
Which brings us to the core of today's discourse. We are examining this phenomenon through the lens of Musab Haldi's 4 Empires coaching framework, specifically as outlined in the introduction to 12 Days to Change Your Life.
A really fascinating text, by the way.
It is. And this framework presents a methodology for whole-person leadership built on a very specific premise, which is that wholeness does not mean lowering your ambition or becoming less successful.
Right. It's not about settling.
Exactly. Instead, it means building a life where success does not cost a leader their health, their relationships, their peace, or their identity. The methodology breaks this down into 4 distinct areas. First, mindset, which is your clarity, beliefs, decisions, and self-trust.
Mm-hmm.
Second, Heartset, focusing on emotional intelligence, relationships, honesty, connection. Then, Healthset, which is your energy, stress, recovery, habits, sustainable performance. And finally, Soulset, encompassing purpose, values, meaning, and legacy.
And the central tension we are unpacking today is, well, what happens when a leader builds an empire in only one isolated area, like financial achievement or status, and completely ignores those inner empires? When that inevitable collapse happens, what exactly are we looking at?
Right, and that is the crux of our disagreement here. I take the position that when success becomes unstable and a high achiever crashes, that fragmentation is primarily a biological and neurological breakdown.
Okay, but
Wait, let me finish the thought. It is a physical failure of the brain and the nervous system's ability to integrate high-stress inputs. The human brain simply cannot sustain isolated cognitive high performance without integrated physical vitality. I mean, you are looking at a hardware crash.
well, I look at the exact same phenomenon and see something completely different. My position is that this collapse is inherently existential. You can, perfectly optimize a leader's biology, you can dial in their sleep, you can maximize their cognitive output, but if they lack deeper meaning and authentic connection, if their Soulset and Heartset are empty, that success remains fundamentally unstable.
So you're saying the biology doesn't matter.
No, I'm saying the collapse isn't just a lack of neurotransmitters or a tired nervous system. It is a crisis of existential alignment.
Okay, well, let me lay out why the biological perspective is impossible to ignore here. Let's look at how the brain actually processes the isolation of success. When we talk about an ambitious leader who is only focusing on achievement, we are talking about a nervous system that is chronically locked in a sympathetic threat response.
Yes, the constant firefighting.
Exactly. They are constantly fighting fires. And neurologically, the brain doesn't know the difference between a missed quarterly target and a physical predator. So the amygdala, the brain's primitive threat detector, just goes into hypervigilance. It floods the body with cortisol.
I understand the stress response, but, you are describing a symptom, not the root cause.
Wait, let me finish the mechanism, because it's not just a symptom, it's the actual cause of the executive failure. When that cortisol floods the system, it actively shuts down the prefrontal cortex. Think of the prefrontal cortex as the CEO of your brain.
Right.
It handles logic, executive function, empathy, strategic thinking. Under chronic stress, the CEO is literally locked out of the office, and the building's primitive security alarm system takes over the intercom. The collapse we see in these highly successful people isn't a sudden loss of willpower or some philosophical crisis of meaning.
I don't know about that.
It's a literal physical inability of the brain to make strategic decisions anymore. You cannot build a sustainable empire on a dysregulated nervous system. That's why the Healthset, the energy, stress recovery, habits, is totally non-negotiable.
Okay, but are you seriously suggesting that a founder's profound sense of emptiness and existential isolation can be solved just by regulating their cortisol levels? Because frankly, that sounds wildly reductive to me.
I'm saying the existential crisis is often just a byproduct of a biologically exhausted brain.
I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Let's look at the source material itself. Chaldea's own story is actually the perfect counterpoint to your purely biological argument.
Oh, you think so?
Absolutely. By the time he developed this framework, he had built and failed at over 50 companies. He famously collapsed at 20 years old, unconscious for 55 minutes. But even after that, he spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on development, therapy, physical optimization, coaching.
Right, he put in the work.
He did. He had the biological tools. He knew how to eat, sleep, and exercise, but he was still fundamentally fragmented. Why? Because you can have cognitive mastery, the mindset empire, and you can have physical vitality, the Healthset empire, but if you lack purpose and values, which is the Soulset, and you lack emotional intelligence and vulnerable relationships, the Heartset, you are still fractured.
But those psychological states require the underlying neurology to function. You can't have emotional intelligence if your brain is inflamed.
True, but having a non-inflamed brain doesn't automatically give you emotional intelligence.
Well,
No, listen, the text explicitly outlines the pathologies of isolated success. It points out that mindset work without Heartset creates this cold confidence that pushes people away. You get a leader who is highly decisive but utterly ruthless, treating every human interaction as transactional.
sure.
And furthermore, Healthset work without Soulset yields physical vitality but spiritual emptiness. Imagine a founder sitting alone at the top of their industry. They are perfectly rested, their cortisol is low, their prefrontal cortex is firing flawlessly. But every relationship they have is based on what they can do for someone else, and imposter syndrome is constantly whispering in their ear.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Right, and that isolation is a crisis of the heart and soul. It is an existential void. They are climbing a ladder only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. A perfectly rested brain doesn't make the wrong wall any more fulfilling.
I see why you think that, but I look at the exact same data and I see a mechanical failure, not a spiritual one. Let me challenge your wrong wall concept with a different analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think of our ambitious executive as a high-performance sports car. The mindset, the clarity, the beliefs, the decision-making, that's the steering and the transmission. The health set, the sleep, recovery, the physical energy, that is the oil in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
If you drive that sports car constantly at redline, day after day, without any oil, the engine is going to seize up. When that engine seizes, the breakdown isn't a crisis of where the car was traveling. It's not about the destination or the soul set. It's a mechanical failure of the engine itself.
That is a brilliant analogy, but it actually proves my exact point.
How so?
Yes, if you don't put oil in the car, the engine seizes. We agree on that. But let me hijack your analogy for a second. What happens when you have a perfectly maintained sports car with pristine oil, a beautifully tuned engine, and the driver intentionally steers it off a cliff because they feel completely empty inside and have no idea why they're even driving in the first place?
Okay, well,
It still crashes, and I would argue it crashes faster and harder precisely because the engine is running so efficiently. That is what happens when you have Healthset and Mindset without Soulset.
But you're acting as if the framework treats meaning and wholeness as some abstract, philosophical realization you just stumble into. It doesn't. The framework approaches wholeness as a systemic biological habit. Look at the actual mechanics of how a leader integrates these empires.
You mean the morning routine?
Yes, it's deeply grounded in daily physical action. The linchpin of this integration is a 90-minute daily architecture, specifically that 20-20-20 morning protocol, where a leader moves for 20 minutes, reflects for 20 minutes, and learns for 20 minutes.
Okay, but if I'm a listener sitting in my car right now, or a founder managing a global team, I'm probably thinking, I barely have time to check my email in the morning before my first crisis hits. How on earth am I supposed to dedicate 90 minutes to a morning routine?
And that reaction right there is the exact biological trap I'm talking about. That frantic, urgent need to check email before you've even brushed your teeth, that is the dysregulation.
Ah, I see.
It is the amygdala dictating your morning. The framework forces you to override that. During that physical movement phase, you elevate your heart rate to 120 or 140 beats per minute. We aren't just doing this to burn calories. We are doing it because elevating the heart rate physically floods the brain with brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
Which is essentially miracle grow for the brain. Yes, I acknowledge the science.
Exactly. It fertilizes the neural pathways so you can actually learn and adapt. Then you move into metacognition. And let's explain what metacognition actually means here, because it's not just a buzzword. It is literally stepping out of the passenger seat of your own brain and looking at the dashboard.
Right.
You observe your autopilot thoughts without reacting to them. When you do that, you physically stop your body's fight or flight sympathetic response and force it into a rest and digest parasympathetic state. You are feeding the prefrontal cortex with strategic input before the world is allowed to demand anything from you.
Okay, I follow the mechanics.
So the wholeness Caldi talks about isn't found on a mountaintop retreat. It is biologically engineered every single morning. You move the leader from a reactive state to a commanding state.
I completely agree that the morning protocol engineers the capacity for wholeness. It prepares the vessel, but a prepared vessel is still empty until you put something in it.
The true linchpin of sustainable success, the thing that actually makes a leader unbreakable, is a fundamental reorientation of their existential purpose.
Let's talk about the psychological shifts required to actually build the Heartset and Soulset empires. The framework emphasizes a profound shift from a get mentality to a give mentality. It requires choosing to serve.
You mean the service protocol, where a leader intentionally mentors someone without expecting any return on investment?
Yes. And think about how radical that is for an ambitious, hyper-successful executive. Their entire life has been built on ROI. If I invest time, I get status, I get money, I get growth. The isolation they feel at the top is because every single relationship has become a transaction.
True. The only way out of that transactional prison is to introduce authentic connection, the Heartset. It's choosing to combine that cognitive command you mentioned with genuine emotional vulnerability. When a leader does that, the framework points out that they increase the psychological safety in their teams by nearly 4 times.
Wow, nearly 4 times?
Yes. It drives higher innovation. That is the antidote to the loneliness of leadership. It's an orientation of the soul. It is a choice to connect, which cannot be biologically engineered.
Well, let me stop you right there, because I want to look closely at that specific claim. You say it cannot be biologically engineered. But how does a leader actually achieve that vulnerability? The framework uses a very specific heart-brain coherence practice to shift a leader from a state of emotional armor to authentic power. It's essentially 15 minutes of structured breath work. Aren't we just medicalizing emotional intelligence here?
What do you mean by medicalizing it?
I mean, you are treating psychological safety and vulnerability not as lofty moral choices, but as measurable physiological states that we can manually regulate, like a thermostat.
Well,
Now think about it. Let's explain the how behind that 4x spike in psychological safety you just mentioned. How does that actually happen? It happens because when a leader does that 15-minute breathing cycle, they physically slow their heart rate. When their heart rate slows, their facial muscles relax, their vocal cords loosen, and they stop projecting subtle, agitated micro-expressions to their team.
right. The team picks up on that.
Exactly. The team's nervous system subconsciously realize, oh, the boss isn't a threat right now. That biological co-regulation is where the psychological safety comes from. We are literally treating an existential relationship crisis with a physiological tool.
That is a fascinating breakdown of the mechanism, and I concede that the tool has a profound physiological component. Heart-brain coherence is absolutely a measurable state.
Right.
But you are confusing the vehicle with the destination. Physiology gives you the steady hand, yes. Breathing for 15 minutes makes you calm. But choosing to use that calm state to step into a boardroom, Drop your ego, admit to your executive team that you are experiencing imposter syndrome, and ask for their honest help.
Yeah.
That is not a biological reflex. That is an act of profound existential courage.
But it's a choice they can only make because their nervous system is no longer screaming at them to defend themselves.
Perhaps, but the Heartset and Soulset dictate what you actually do with that calm nervous system. Let's look at another core psychological shift in the framework: confronting mortality. The methodology forces a leader to sit quietly and imagine they have exactly 6 months to live. This isn't about lowering cortisol.
No, it's pretty intense.
It is. This is a deliberate, calculated destruction of the ego-driven paradigm that caused their fragmentation in the first place. When you realize your time is finite, what shifts? Suddenly market share doesn't keep you warm at night. You start asking, what would I build if money wasn't the goal? What is the legacy I am actually leaving? A leader only truly becomes unbreakable when their business transitions from being their entire identity and ultimate purpose to merely becoming a vehicle for their deeper purpose.
I hear you. But again, I have to point out the operational reality. A founder can only engage in a meditation on their own mortality and actually process the weight of their legacy if their brain isn't currently suffocating in metabolic waste.
Okay, fair.
They need the 7 to 9 hours state. They need the health set in place just to have the cognitive bandwidth to ask those questions. If you are sleeping 4 hours a night and running on pure adrenaline, a mortality meditation is just going to trigger a panic attack, not an existential breakthrough.
That is a fair point. The health set is the necessary foundation, but my argument remains that the foundation is not the house. If you only optimize the brain and the body, you get someone who is physically energized and strategically brilliant, but who might use that energy and brilliance to aggressively alienate their team and build a legacy they fundamentally hate. The success collapses because it lacks the anchor of meaning.
I think we are arriving at a very clear defining tension here. If I summarize the biological lens, it's this. Sustainable high performance fundamentally requires respecting the physical limitations of the human organism. You cannot bypass your biology through sheer willpower and ambition.
Right.
The hardware requires daily maintenance, elevating the heart rate for BDNF, consolidating memories through sleep, engaging the prefrontal cortex through metacognition to prevent amygdala hijacks. You simply cannot build an empire on a dysregulated nervous system. The crash is inevitable because the body will eventually force the truth upon you. It will shut you down.
And from the existential lens, my summary is this: a regulated nervous system is absolutely essential, but it only gets you to the starting line. It is the prerequisite for wholeness, not the entirety of it. Without the conscious, deliberate alignment of your external achievements with authentic human connection, your Heartset, and a deeper, service-oriented legacy, your Soulset, the view from the pinnacle of your career will always feel empty. The crash might not be a physical collapse on the office floor. It might be a silent, internal collapse of meaning, a realization that you sacrificed your relationships and your identity for a metric that ultimately doesn't matter. And that internal collapse is arguably just as destructive to a leader's life as a physical one.
Which means, despite our different angles of approach, we fiercely agree on the profound danger of fragmentation. We both recognize that building success in only one area of life, whether that is wealth, business growth, or public status, while ignoring the inner landscape, makes that success incredibly fragile.
Precisely. And that is the ultimate thesis of Four Empires coaching. True wholeness is not a compromise. It does not require a founder to lose their edge, lower their ambition, or settle for mediocrity in their business. It requires the simultaneous, deliberate integration of all four domains: mindset, Heartset, Healthset, and Soulset.
When you integrate all four, you don't diminish your external success, you actually secure it. You ensure that your success is sustainable and anti-fragile. The business accelerates, but more importantly, you actually get your life back in the process. You build a life where achieving your goals doesn't cost you your identity.
It's about building a masterpiece both publicly and privately.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this debate, we want to bring this theoretical discussion directly into your reality. We've unpacked the architecture of these four distinct areas of leadership and life. We've looked at the biology of the crash and the existential weight of the climb. So we want to leave you with the exact question that this framework forces every ambitious leader to confront. Look honestly at your own life right now. Which empire has been receiving the least attention in your life recently?
If this conversation helped you see something more clearly, take the free 4 Empires assessment at musabkali.com/assessment. And if you would like a private conversation about your leadership, business, or personal direction, you can book a free discovery call with Musab Khalid at musabkali.com.
Remember, a skyscraper can look flawless from the outside, but it is only as unshakable as the foundation it rests on. Keep building, but build whole.